Today, I welcome someone who needs a little introduction, Bob Rennie. Some may know him as the Condo King. Bob is the founder and executive director of Rennie, one of Vancouver's largest real estate marketing companies. Born and raised in East Vancouver, Bob started selling real estate in the East Side at the young age of 19. His resume includes marketing and sales of the Fairmont Pacific Rim, Shangri-La, Olympic Village, and many other notable projects. Bob has displayed tremendous dedication to enhancing arts and culture in BC during his lifetime. He's achieved royalty status at the Canadian contemporary art scene and was nominated by Art News magazine as one of the top 200 collectors in the world. Bob's been the recipient of several awards, including the Golden and Diamond Jubilee medals. And in 2014, as I can see you're wearing there, Bob, very proudly, he was awarded the Order of British Columbia. Bob, thanks for taking the time to be on Coastal Front today.
Thanks for having me. Be careful because we write that stuff.
Now, let me start by jumping right into an announcement that's literally just come out from David Eby a few minutes ago. And I believe you spoke to him earlier today.
Yep. We had a conversation. I was in his office this morning.
Okay, so you're in his office this morning. So it's fresh off the press here. And he's announced a $500 million fund to help nonprofit organizations purchase older rental buildings to keep them in the nonprofit sector and not be prone to be demolished and redeveloped for developers, as I understand in layman's terms. Is that the sort of theme here of this policy?
I think simplistically, we need some immediate solutions. You know, you drive down Hastings Street, you can see the challenges there, and I parallel it to in the 80s. I used to have a luncheon every year, and we would buy a used van for an old politically incorrect term, the Burnaby Association for the Mentally Handicapped, and I was highly criticized that we would buy a used van, but that's the amount of money we would raise, $15,000 at a lunch, but 6 months later it's used anyways. But if the immediacy, if you can buy a 30 or 40-year-old 22-unit building, one, you're not, it's less concentration of subsidized housing because they're smaller buildings, and I think part of the Premier's worry is these buildings are just going into inventory as holding property, and eventually that inventory goes away and something new goes up. So right now, I think we just have to do anything we can on the subsidized housing and affordability end of the market. So okay. It's a good college try to create new product. I think it's very difficult to create affordable rental unless we have government land, or for some of our larger private landowners with a low historical land cost that they can make those numbers work out.
Okay. So if we use this example of this $500 million fund to help nonprofits in acquiring properties that they otherwise couldn't afford to buy, to kind of be able to compete against developers, so to speak. Being a bit of a free market capitalist myself, I mean, I kind of see this as just this. Wouldn't this just drive up prices? I mean, won't this just cause developers to want to pay more then? So you've got a East Side Vancouver 3-story building that's 60 years old, and maybe it's at $12 million, and now a developer says, okay, well, I'll just have to bid up and now I'll pay 15 for it.
You know, with current zoning, if you're paying $400,000 a door, or as we drift a little further west, you're paying $500,000 a door, those numbers don't work out to buy that 14-unit building and tear it down.
Okay.
So unless you're going for a rezoning, and then there's going to be a CAC involved.
Yeah.
I just look at it, there is no silver bullet to any of it, and we all get nervous when the government interferes.
Yeah.
That now they're causing
not everybody does,
but further competition. But at today's interest rates, buying that 14-unit building without a government interest rate or a subsidized interest rate doesn't pencil out anyways.
I see.
And
okay.
I think
unless you're able to rezone it and build higher.
then build higher, and that's a 3 to 4 year process to go to go through that. And
Okay.
no one's allowing spot zoning to go from 4 stories to 22 stories.
Right. Yeah. I know before you came on to our show today, when we spoke briefly yesterday, on the theme of affordable housing, you talked to me about this being more than just a Vancouver issue. This is a regional issue.
Yeah,
Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I gave you my example that what if the eastern boundary of Vancouver wasn't Boundary Road and was North Road?
Right.
It would be a completely different topic because it would all be called Vancouver. I think we're trying to solve everything in Vancouver, and everything should be done. Let's look at the region. But I'll give you an example of a building. Rennie does the leasing up of buildings for our corporate clients. So Great West Life built a building called the Chronicle at Robson and Cardero. At the ribbon cutting, Kennedy Stewart was our mayor, and I thanked him very much for moving this along. But if I don't get 10 more of them, rents are going to go to $6 a foot. I was being facetious. We projected that day that we would get $4.95 per square foot rent, which is at $5, a 500 square foot suite's $2,500 a month. Tough to fit in with local incomes. We ended up leasing up the building at $5.72 a foot. For Great West Life, it really increased the return. The pro forma looked great. But now every building coming up, given today's interest rates and construction costs, has to get those rates.
Yeah.
So as we approach $6 a foot, that makes a 500 square foot one bedroom $3,000 a month. It fits with Amazon incomes.
Right.
The 7,000 to 9,000 jobs that are coming to town, but we have to create products knowing that our household income for the region is $117,000 a year.
Yeah.
That doesn't fit after tax paying out $3,000 a month for your one bedroom.
Yeah, sure. So with respect to creating product, I've had a lot of politicians come on Coastal Front over the last 4 years who've said, and most of them have been kind of that more left-leaning, NDP type politicians, and they or green, and they keep saying that this is not a supply issue, that this is it's a product type issue, like that there's too many studio or one bedroom condos that are being created and not enough for families. What is your view on the sort of, I guess, the product mix of these developments that are going on in the city?
So for family housing, our land cost just doesn't work. So that has to be, we should probably look at ourselves more as a metro region.
Right. This goes back to your regional issue.
Yeah, and if you look at the region, who can supply townhomes, who can supply single family homes, or a good single family lot in Surrey, I think, is $1.5 million to $1.8 million.
Right.
So that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
With local incomes, but something that I proposed to our new mayor and council, Ken Sim, and I've talked about it a lot, that if I owned the city, I would look at a model of maybe taking from Main Street to Boundary and from 33rd to Broadway and rezone it to 100% townhomes. Mm-hmm. But on a 33-foot lot, you could build 6 townhomes. On a 66-foot lot, as an example, you could build 16. On a 99-foot lot, you could build 35.
Right.
Which would be stacked. But we could only decant 5 to 7% of that per year. We would take speculation out of the market, because why do I have to overpay you today to get in that 5 to 7% allotment? I'll get in next year's allotment. Some orderly process where over the next 25 years, I know where the neighborhood's going, mm-hmm. and it's meaningful supply for families, etc.
Yeah.
But it's hard for our mayor and council to take the political risk of a 25-year plan when they want to get reelected in 4 years.
Right, that's a good point.
Most of our politicians, if we look at a 4-year term, first 6 months, our new mayor is figuring out what he promised and how is he going to achieve it.
Yeah.
And then 18 months before the next election, the Teflon suit goes on, because you don't want to do anything controversial that will affect your electability.
Right.
So we have 2-year decision makers.
Yeah.
So we need to take political risk, which is, I think, with the province maybe incentivizing cities to create meaningful supply and density, they can take some of that political risk off of our civic governments.
Right. I'll continue along the theme, Bob, of affordability. It sounds like what you're proposing is one solution, going back to this, looking at it from a lens of a regional issue versus just a Vancouver issue. I actually have proposed to a few of these politicians, like, why not make Vancouver consist of make it what happened with Toronto, like make it a much larger city, amalgamate Burnaby and Surrey and New Westminster and Vancouver. Would you be in favor of something like that?
I think that whether we get to a pure metro region, we should be doing a lot more looking economies of scale at working together. But if you go 10 years from now, we'll be the only metro region that's not named after the largest city, because Surrey will be larger than Vancouver, right. Yet we will always refer to this as Vancouver. So there's even a flaw in our perception of it.
Right.
But
that's a good point.
It's really hard to become a metro region when there's so many opposing political wills.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get everyone at our company, our economists and our data technicians and everyone we talk to, is let's just start with whatever we're doing isn't working. So it's fine for people to come on and say, well, supply is not the answer. Well, just give me an answer. But right now, we're approaching 450,000 per year coming in for immigration. And I met with Terry Beach, a Liberal MP, the other day, and I said, Justin Trudeau and banning foreign ownership is just a political move for 2 years. Because you're bringing in 450,000 people that won't all have their PR cards. So now we're forcing them to rent and compete in the rental market.
Yeah.
And I think he looked for a political carrot against probably a brown community and an Asian community,
right,
that seems to be the culprit for housing. And when you break apart the numbers, they're not the largest culprit. Speculation's done 85% by locals.
Mm-hmm. So if we think about other larger municipalities around North America or around the world, we're again going to this on this theme of affordable housing for many people other than just those who can afford it, the wealthy. Bob, are there any other regions around the world or municipalities that you see a good working model that Vancouver or Metro Vancouver should be modeling after?
First, we're afraid of density. I think I mentioned.
It seems like we are.
I mentioned on the phone that when Kevin Falcon and BC United Party, BC Liberal Party, whatever name they're using this week, talks about supply, it all comes off as lining the pockets of the rich developer.
Yes.
The community I advise. Yet when the NDP and David Eby talk about supply, it comes off as a solution.
Yeah.
So all of our talk on housing is so politically charged, rather than rising above it and go, what are these solutions? And anywhere it's working, it's a regional strategy.
Right.
I forget.
Do you have one as an example that you could use as a comparison, a municipality that you're familiar with, whether it's in Canada or not?
I don't have a model that works. I was out doing a talk in Toronto a few years ago, and everybody's complaining there's no single family housing. Well, you can't create it in the city.
Yeah.
And there's no affordable single family housing, can ever happen again in the city of Vancouver. Yet we're hanging on to this single family zoning for dear life. But
that's been my observation as someone who grew up in a small town, and land cost was very cheap, and I come here to Vancouver, and there's so many people that have this dream that they should still have the right in Vancouver to own a single family, fully detached home, and it should be affordable. And I think we have to look at our city as a city like Tokyo or London or Paris. I mean, you can't buy a single family home in London, not in London proper.
Nelson Rockefeller's grandchildren can't buy in Manhattan.
Right.
But yet we all hang on to that dream of wanting it. I've done this for 47, 48 years. Life's always been good to us, but when we built a home, we built it in Burnaby. I
Yeah.
was never embarrassed that we were building in Burnaby.
Sure.
Yet, I don't know if you remember, around 2011, 2012, a lady named Eveline held up a banner that said, "Can't buy a house for $1 million." And the mayor asked me to meet with her, and I said, no. I said, because I'll just get involved in the controversy. But I said, she sent out a buy order. She didn't send out a sell order. She said to everybody, you better get in on this because you can't get any of it.
Right.
And so we have to watch how we're just marketing and politicizing all of these fun statements, but it's coming at a huge cost right now. And the trouble is there's a lot of money out there looking for housing. My fear right now is, rates, maybe they'll go up a little bit more, but as soon as rates come off 0.1%, just like coming out of COVID, all that money is going to come out of the bank and it's all going to move around. I'll give you a graph that you're welcome to use, but if you're 55 years of age and older, in our region, you're sitting on $318 billion in clear title housing.
Wow.
Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh socialized that maybe we're going to put a tax on your principal residence. I think it's impossible to do because
the gain you've made on whatever you're
But I put in a new kitchen and built a new sun deck and you didn't. So how are you going to calculate that?
Yeah.
I think the fear is that maybe a 1 or 2% tax will come on the transfer.
Right.
Federally. So you've got a lot of, and change to capital gains. You saw what happened in your industry and people moving things around. I think you're seeing the transfer of wealth by the living rather than by the dead.
Right.
And so that $318 billion owned by over 55-year-olds, people are buying down and helping their kids. They're freeing up capital and helping their kids, but just under $100 billion is owned by 75-year-olds plus.
Wow.
That money's coming at us. So instead of acknowledging everything holistically, we keep looking at things in isolation. Nobody's marrying jobs to housing. It's fine we're putting in 7,000 to 9,000 Amazon jobs and we're becoming a bit of a tech center. I don't say we're Silicon North, but I think if it's a lot easier to get talent from around the world to say they'll live in Vancouver than maybe to live in some American cities right now.
Right.
And yet we bring these jobs in and then we complain about affordability rather than speaking openly about marrying housing to the jobs. And then we don't want cars in our city, yet we don't have adequate transportation to get home.
Right. Yeah, these are all really good points. And it kind of goes back to your point that we're looking at these problems in isolation, and they all blend with one another.
Exactly. Even there's been a lot of articles, even with world problems, that whether it's climate change or whether it's aging population or whether it's healthcare, we keep looking at them all in isolation. Yet they're all a domino effect on each other. But I don't know how you get all levels of government and everyone together. But I think maybe people like me talking about it and just moving the conversation along.
Yeah. Speaking of the 3 levels of government, a good client, longtime client of mine, has worked with at a fairly high level. He's a consultant for a lot of the big developers in the city, the Acolinis and the Grosvenor and Concord Pacific. He worked for Concord Pacific for many years. And he was telling me the horror stories of working with the city of Vancouver for these, monster projects, the kind that you market and sell, and how long it takes, the negotiations with the CACs. And he was telling me that a lot of his clients, especially the smaller ones that are not as deep pocketed, they're literally selling off they're completing their Vancouver projects and they're not repurchasing land here. They're going to North Vancouver, they're going to Burnaby, or they're even going to municipalities like Edmonton, because I like to use the term that Chip Wilson used in our interview. He said that money goes to where it's most well loved. And I want to get your thoughts on that seems to be a municipal government issue, that we're not allowing projects to get advanced quickly enough.
Yeah, it's systemic in all municipalities and cities. Vancouver's, it's really tough.
Okay.
But we don't see a lot of people selling out. We see some people that may be putting the brakes on and going, I'm going to look, land's so expensive in Vancouver anyways. And,
Yes.
And it's hard to find large opportunities. But, it's something that we have to look at with civic government is, we all want to change process. Our new mayor is going to work on changing process here in Vancouver. Mayor Surrey's look at changing process. But especially in Vancouver, what is the culture of the planning department to champion the development industry? Mm-hmm. I always use the example that the developer pulls up in a Rolls Royce to City Hall, runs in with his architect and his plans and says, I want this done immediately, but I'll be in Hawaii. Well, no one likes that guy.
Right.
So somehow we have to bridge, how can we fast track things? Mm-hmm. Again, if I own the city, I'd look at the 100 people in the planning department and let's pay them $1 per door on everything that's approved in a 12-month period. 3,000 units approved, you get a check for $1,000. Well, we're not going to get that past unions, but maybe if that money could go to a charity of choice, or if that money could go to a downtown east side solution of choice, right. I think we have to start going back to it. What we're doing is not working, so can we find a creative solution?
Yeah. I like your $1 a door. That's pretty creative.
Well, would the developer pay an extra $100 a door to know that it could be approved within 12 months?
Yeah. Of course they would. I mean, this is the feedback I've heard from developers, is that there's so much uncertainty because it takes so long to get a project from land acquisition to people moving in Vancouver, that all has to get factored into their models. And it makes it, obviously any project, the longer out it goes, the more uncertainty there is.
Yeah, but a land cost at 2.5% holding for 2 years is one thing. But to hold it at 5% for 3 years, it's cost prohibitive, and it just gets passed on to the consumer.
Well, that's the thing, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, that's the only person who's paying it, right?
Well, the bank's not going to finance you unless you show whether it's your 14, 15, or 18% return.
Yeah.
So to get that return, all those costs are padded into the consumer. I've often thought that similar to the gas pump, or when you buy a refrigerator, it has an inner guide on it, and it says how much goes to tax dollars. Perhaps that should be disclosed every time you buy a piece of developed real estate, and then the consumer understands where it's going, and it would take some perception off the pressure of the developer. Mm-hmm. There's a certain point that if the developer is not making a return, he may as well just stay in Hawaii.
Right.
So our thing has always been, how can we get meaningful supply for the development community, for the consumer, and a decent return. And that's getting difficult right now.
When I interviewed Ken Sim a couple years ago, I believe he was the one who stated that there was some report that came out stating that in Vancouver, for developers, that government delays in approving their projects account for something like 35% of their costs.
Yeah. So if that was on an enter guide or on your contract when you bought it, it's not to cause outrage. It's just to understand it.
Yeah. Like you said, like at the gas pump, when you see that little, the little pie chart, and it shows you how much of your gas is actually going towards taxes.
Yeah. So what are we going to do when we all have electric cars and we're addicted to that gas tax?
Right.
We're going to tax the car.
Yeah.
Like all about we're an idea a minute, but all of nothing, it's not looked at holistically.
Yeah. Now, Ken has a super majority, as I like to describe it. I mean, he's got so many councillors on council.
He has a full slate.
He has a full slate. And I don't know, we saw that with Gregor Robertson. I don't know if we saw it in his very last term. I can't remember.
No, that was
a mixed
one
bag.
of the problems with Kennedy Stewart and the last mayor and council.
Yeah.
Is there wasn't a full slate.
Yeah. Are you optimistic that Ken Sim and ABC are going to be able to make some very big changes?
I'm optimistic that they're going to be able to get a few things done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether changing process at City Hall will change to where we want to see it because of the culture
Right.
of everything.
Yeah,
right
I mean
now.
that seems to be the bigger issue. It's not that Kennedy Stewart or Ken Sim that they're not wanting to change, but it seems almost impossible to get the culture to change at City Hall. We're not talking about politicians here. We're talking about the staff and the leadership of those staff and the way in which they view, like you described, the rich developer coming in the Rolls Royce.
That's why I think there's some sort of participation by incentive so that everybody's rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
Because nobody likes to get yelled at.
Mm-hmm.
And so people coming yelling that this has taken me 2 years and, their pay doesn't go up for taking it. We're all incentivized in what we do in our careers. So you'll take more abuse, but it's just somehow that has to be worked on. That's between the HR department and psychologists, etc.
Yeah.
But the lag in time has put more pressure on them to not like the development community. And
Yeah.
I'm sure people listening at City Hall will say I'm totally wrong. Well, prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Prove it wrong,
Let's bring this down to a year approval rather than the.
Yeah, because like you said, what we have been doing isn't working.
Yeah, and this goes back to how we started this. That is having a $500 million fund to buy used buildings, putting too much pressure on the market. We have to find multiple solutions because there's not going to be one.
Yeah.
Silver bullet. But
yeah.
if you drive down Hastings and you see either side of Hastings and Maine, we've just left our office. We moved out of Chinatown. But you can't save Chinatown or Gastown without dealing with the challenges of Hastings Street.
Yeah.
And we need, which is why the more immediacy of the housing. In isolation, everything is wrong that either government tries. But maybe in accumulation, if there's enough ideas, that we will see some easing of pressure.
Yeah. I want to start asking you, I agree with your idea that in isolation, there's lots of little strategies that the government seems to be trying to implement, but there needs to be like a bigger sort of strategy that unfortunately it extends 25 years. And most politicians think in terms of, like you described it, 1 year and 2 year terms between those two election cycles. But I am going to ask you about some specific policies that we've seen rolled out. And you can just give me your sort of like thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever your opinion is, okay? I had a chance to interview at the BC Real Estate Association, the BCREA, Trevor Coote, their CEO, and their economist, Brendan Ogmanson. And when they came in, this was just as the government they'd already announced, but it hadn't been implemented because it was like the end of 2022, this new cooling off period. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about for the listeners. Basically, the idea here is that if you're a seller and I'm a buyer and I go to buy your home from you, I get now, is it 3 days?
3 day cooling off period.
3 day cooling off period. And they were not in favor of this. In fact, one of their criticism was that they've given the government a lot of suggestions, of which most of them have fallen on deaf ears. And of course, their group represents I think it was like 15,000 licensed real estate agents across all of BC. Yeah. What's your view on this cooling off strategy?
So my industry is very spoiled and they don't like change. But unless you're offering all cash with no conditions, you usually have a financing clause for 7 days, etc. But if we just continue to we all make money if we put the consumer first. So a 3 day cooling off period, chances are they weren't going to go through with it anyways on their 7th day with financing, whatever technicality or whatever building inspection takes place. I think we're just all looking for things to get upset about. If that's the worst thing that can happen to my industry, it's okay. I don't get as upset about those things because a consumer buying a home is the largest for most people. I use 80% of all sales on MLS are under $1.5 million.
80%.
80%.
Wow.
And yet listed on MLS, my numbers within a couple percent, it's only 54% of the inventory. So you can see where that pressure is. But people don't want to be forced into decisions.
Okay. So you're in favor. You give it a thumbs up.
I'm okay with it. The flaw is there's 3 offers. You tend to take the one with the best terms and price, and then you lose that guy. And then you go back to the other 2 offers, and they go, "Oh, that guy didn't want it. I don't want it. What I was going to pay for it anyways."
Yeah, you lose that window.
The seller loses that pressure point.
Uh-huh.
But everybody's doing okay, and I think we should look at the consumer first. And we have 250. I don't know. My company has 110 full-time staff in project marketing, and then there's another company that's about 250 brokers. So I'll probably hear from them this afternoon.
Well, we won't be publishing for a couple of weeks, so at least you got to get a couple of weeks to
I'll give
figure
them
out what
a
your
warning.
response is going to be.
Them a warning. Yeah, it's not neutral. I'm okay with it.
Okay. Next question is with respect to, in November, Premier EB announced changes to the Strata Act. And this change eliminates the ability for stratas to not allow rentals, with I think the exception for homes for 55 and older.
Oh, for over 55.
Over 55. So maybe first of all, can you just briefly, in layman's terms, describe that policy so that the listeners understand what it's about, and what is your take on that one?
In wanting, I believe the underpinning is in wanting to create more rental supply. So I always use, for the last 30 years when we came into project marketing, that people in the project marketing business are really the rental supplier to the city, when 50% of buildings are bought by families and investors, and then they put that into the rental market. Because for our low vacancy rate, we don't have a lot of rental agencies gouging you for 2 or 3 months rent if they find you a place. Everything's done on Craigslist through a lot of ma and pa's. So the buildings feel that tenants are not as good an occupant as a homeowner, so they've put in rental restrictions. So because of that 55 years of age, they'll want to, as a technicality, to say that renters aren't allowed. But the trouble is, if I own in a building and it's rented out to my nephew or to an arm's length tenant, and you put that 55-year-old clause in, I'm grandfathered.
Right.
So again, the sensation of the 3 days, the sensation of let's all go to the 55-year-olds, everybody's just glomming on to a negative. It's not going to have.
It's not material, is what you're saying.
The catch of changing your building to over 55 years old is probably as onerous as allowing tenants.
Right.
Because now you're a 32-year-old couple that wanted to buy in that building, and you've been waiting so you can live close to your sister or your grandma, and now I can't buy in the building.
Right.
So you've now affected values by limiting who can buy in it. It's all yin and yang. Every time something comes in and we think, well, we'll go beat it, you're causing another.
Well, so then would you be in favor of just not having these in the first place? Let the market be what it is?
Most buildings, when they come on new, allow rentals. So it has to be a vast change. But if 50% of the building's been sold to investors, and a lot of this in investor market, they instead of keeping money in the bank, they buy something and they rent it out. They become speculators when the market moves too fast. Mm-hmm. So they bought in a pre-sale, the market goes up 30% before closing, and they go, you know what, I can pay your university tab, I can retire 2 years earlier. They sell it. They didn't buy as a speculator. They bought to hold rental. So instead of building a 300-unit building that a large pension fund owns for rental, 150 of them are owned by very small ma and pas that are just landlords, and they want to keep that rental in there.
Yeah.
In smaller buildings with larger suites, you have less rental anyways,
Right.
because that tends to go to homeowners.
Right.
The market levels itself out.
Yeah.
I don't want to be pro all of these changes, but they're not as drastic as we think.
Okay, that's helpful. That's good insight, because you're right. We hear about it on the news, and that's the purpose that mainstream media exists, is to like promote fear and greed, and so they want to make you feel fearful or greedy about these policies. But what you're basically saying is that, on the whole, these aren't really not very material policies in the first place. They're not going to move the needle one way or the other.
Co-ops in the West End trade at a lesser value than a condominium across the street because you're not allowed to rent it out.
Right.
So it affects value. The smaller buildings, they'll yell that it creates a lesser environment if we got tenants in here. But we can't have it all.
Yeah.
If you want a gated community, you can go buy a single family home in a gated community.
Right.
But we live in urban settings, so we have to understand urban values.
Yeah. I want to talk about tax policy for a moment. So in my mind, taxes are imposed by government for one of two purposes. One is to generate revenue, and the second, and sometimes they're both one and the same. Second is to change behavior. So we saw under Christy Clark and the BC Liberal Party, they implemented, just before they got ousted, a foreign home buyer tax. And I think at the time it was 15 or 10%. 15%. And then the NDP came along, and now they've bumped it up to 30%, if I recall. Is that the right number?
20.
Is it 20?
Yeah.
20, okay. And then now, of course, now the federal government's banned foreign ownership altogether.
As a political move.
Sure, yeah. Political, for sure, yeah. I think everything that Justin Trudeau does is political.
Turn the volume off, we win. Turn the volume on, I'm not sure anymore.
Here's my view. So that on that policy, and I'd like you to give me your thoughts. When you take a tax like that and you increase it to 20%, you're not looking to generate higher revenues. You're actually looking to stop foreign investors from buying here. At 20%, I mean, I don't know what foreign buyer would want to put their money into real estate in Vancouver. And so when I talked with David, I said, like, why don't you set some threshold? Because again, this was all based on the assumption that all this foreign money was coming in, and it was causing prices to rise, and it was pushing out the missing middle, the politicians like to call, and not allowing them to be able to buy real estate. And I said, well, but the thing is, I live over in West Point Grey, and I live around a whole bunch of houses that are $20 million plus. And I said to him, well, like, if a foreign buyer wants to buy a $20 million home,
it has nothing to do with local incomes.
No, it has not. And even if that price of that house were to, in some apocalyptic environment, drops by 50% in value, it's still $10 million. It's still not affordable. So why don't we allow speculation where we take 5 or 10% of a tax? Let me make the tax 5 or 10%. Make it something that a foreign investor who's trying to like harbor they want to take money out of India or China or South Africa, where they have a weak currency, and they want to move it to a stronger economy where they know that money, it's basically in a form of like sitting in the bank, but it's for only homes that are, at least $10 million or more. Now you're generating revenue. I mean, isn't that a good thing to have speculation amongst the very expensive real estate? Just keep it moving. And also, every time those houses sell, there's also a property transfer tax that gets generated.
And we shouldn't care about the over 10 million.
I don't think,
as I say, with 80% of our sales on MLS being under 1.5 million in our region, there's where we should focus.
Right.
But when Christie put in the foreign buyer tax, Carol Taylor, who was our former Minister of Finance under the Liberal Party when Gordon was in, Carol and I spent a couple months putting together a speculation tax that once your name goes on title, if you sell before 3 years, Year 1 is very onerous. Year 2, onerous. Year 3, a little closer to capital gains. So that we kick the speculator out of the market that want, even though I believe people turn into speculators, they weren't when they made the purchase. It kicks them out of the market, or it forces us to keep rental inventory. And we urged her to put this in rather than a foreign buyer tax. Again, just like Justin Trudeau, putting in a foreign buyer tax is racist. We're not after people that look like you and me.
Right.
It's caused people to be yelled at on the seawall.
Right.
And then we've seen speculative data come out that based on their last name, there must be a foreign buyer.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we had an opening at the Hub in Surrey, 350 units in a building. I went out there to see the opening day, and 95% of the room had black hair,
Right.
Asian or South Asian. Less than 2% of the sales were foreign buyers. But it's caused us to just lump everybody into one.
So it's been very divisive.
Yeah, I even had what if foreign buyers couldn't buy under $1.5 million? Let's
Right.
reserve that.
Yeah, that's what I'm
let's
talking
reserve
about.
that for
Yeah.
for locals. But we tax tobacco till probably everybody in this room doesn't smoke.
Right.
We're not going to quit living in houses.
Right.
But it's become a place to just keep taxing and taxing. And we have, I don't have the graph here, within 3 years, well, right now, without immigration, we have more deaths than births in our province. So if someone's going to bring me a bread pan and be my lawyer and pay taxes 20 years from now, we need immigration.
Sure.
So we're going to break 500,000 probably by 2025,
I think, is their plan.
26. So we need immigration, and immigration comes because there's jobs, and immigration comes for
better life.
for lifestyle.
Yeah.
So you're luring people in, but we say you can't quite live like me. We didn't look after the other side of the coin, that you come here, you work for 3 years, maybe then I can apply to get my foreign buyer tax back.
Mm-hmm.
We're a melting pot. Well, we're not quite a melting pot. We're a melting pot for some of us, but not for everybody. And I think that I'm just waiting for someone in America to say, well, everybody in Palm Springs, we're going to tax you. Because we can't have it all, and I think it's the wrong solution, especially if 85% of what ends up speculation is done by locals.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Australia has that foreign buyers can only buy new. Well, could you imagine Bob Rennie lobbying for that? Because then it's, we just want more new.
Yeah.
But again, they're politically expedient to get in the headlines, but we've just been asked to write a report on a large development, how we feel the foreign buyer tax is. I'll tie it in. If it was 10%, people just pay it.
That's what I'm talking about.
20%, it's going in Auntie's name. Everybody's looking for a workaround.
That's right.
So
why not make it 5 or 10%? And like, I like the idea of maybe you if you want to have a ban. Again, I don't understand whether it's the federal ban on foreign buyers or it's the provincial foreign buyers tax. Like, again, going back to the one part of the market that really moves the needle when it comes to tax collection is these monster homes that are $5 and $8 and $10 million.
but
and they're not affordable homes for local Vancouver.
The fellow buying a $15 million home, whether there's a $3 billion tax on it, or the owner shares it with the buyer, or however that gets washed out in the market, has nothing to do with our incomes. We all get, I believe there's only 500 homes in British Columbia. The office, I'll send you the data so that I'm right. 500 homes in British Columbia assessed over $12 million.
Right.
Yet we talk about the Ferraris like everybody has one, and we should only be talking about the Chevrolets.
Yes.
But we lump it all into the same conversation because we actually like that moniker that we're one of the most expensive places in the world to live. But we're not when you look at 80% of our sales are under 1.5 million.
Yeah.
So we should be resetting it, that we're paying attention to what fits in with local incomes, where we're protecting that, and where we're not as worried about over 5 million, over $10 million.
Well said. Yeah, I agree. Most of your consumers, the customers that buy properties through Rennie, are people buying for their own homes. Is that a fair statement? Is it?
That's the myth.
Okay.
To get people to buy into a pre-sale, and like Shangri-La was 48 months.
Yeah.
It's half our investors.
Okay.
Or it's a lot. What we see is a lot of family investment is mom and dad might buy down and live in it. If you go to university in Surrey, you live in it. If we decide to live more in the Okanagan and Bowen Island, we'll keep it as a pied-à-terre here. It's multi-pronged. They're not just buying in as a sheer investor number cruncher, because you have to put 40% down plus to make those numbers work.
But a fairly significant segment of these buyers are still buying for their own home.
They're buying for their own home.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
So that leads me into the next couple questions I have. When we first started talking, maybe before we were filming, you were talking about the cost to buy a 700 square foot condo in Vancouver, and how much you need in a down payment alone.
Yeah. And so look.
So give the listeners a sense of like what you've got to come up with.
So if our regional household income is 117,000, you can qualify. I think 4.69 was the rate they used the other day, to buy a $709,000 something.
Something, yeah.
A 1-bedroom downtown, a 2-bedroom in Langley.
Right.
Wherever that fits in, but that's with 149,000 down. So if
you have to come up with $149,000.
So if the household is earning $117,000, so that put you in a 30% tax bracket.
Yeah.
So you're bringing in $90,000 a year.
Yeah.
You expect to be driving a decent car, and you expect to be living in decent rental accommodation, but if $4,000 or $5,000 a month is going out just to cover your cars and your rental, how do you save your $149,000?
Like even if you could save $20,000 a year,
so 7 years later,
right,
that $709,000 property that you're going to buy, chances are has gone up $151,000.
Yeah.
So how do you get ahead of it? But
so one of my questions, Bob, around this is, as you know, there's a program, and I've helped lots of my younger clients over my career with the first-time home buyers application, where they can take money out of their RSP, right? So that same taxpayer can put their savings into an RSP, and they get basically 30 cents back in the dollar as part of their RSP contributions. And then later, when they do accumulate enough, but the problem is it's capped at, I think, like $40,000. I'm not sure what the number is, but it's a very low number. I mean, to me, this should be at least indexed to housing prices. I mean, if you're buying a house in Saskatoon, no problem. But if you're trying to buy a condo in Vancouver, the first-time home buyers using their RSP savings is a very minimal.
It doesn't put a large enough dent.
Yes.
In it, when I was married, our first house, we were given a $5,000 grant to help buy it.
Right.
But it was $55,000.
Right.
So it's pretty well 10%.
Yeah.
Of the purchase price. But you deal with affluent clients, so if a household income's $500,000, they're paying 53% tax.
Yeah.
But so they're bringing in $250,000.
Yeah.
They expect to be driving quite a car.
Yeah.
And having a suntan and living in a decent place. How do they save up $1.5 million to buy their $3 million? So
what do you think the solution is? Do these people just need to accept the lower standard of living? Do we need to have a lower tax base, like on income taxes? Do we allow banks to offer mortgages with zero down? What do you think the solution is? Longer amortization of mortgages?
Nobody's going to subsidize you to make money. So we're looking at working with frontline workers to create workforce housing that we think we can offer for 30% below market. 50% of it will be ownership. 50% of the complex will be rental. And then there'll be something on title to make sure you don't make a windfall profit. But it's just one of the creative solutions. We're dealing with another group that are looking at doing some agri-housing on agricultural land that we might be able to bring in a 2-bedroom for $799,000, a very small cottage home, and then it'll have a plot and some attached land for farming, etc.
So there's ideas here.
There's ideas, but they haven't all. I sit at these tables and you go, okay, how are we going to move it along? How are we going to get this?
You need political willpower
in the next
behind
2
it.
years, yeah. But back to your savings, that number that I use, the $318 billion in clear title housing, that's the money that's probably going to fund 60% of the first-time home buyers.
Right.
And then
that's mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, either passing away or before they do, passing that money down to the younger kids.
Yeah, they're either taking a loan on their home or they're actually getting that money transferred now while they're living before taxes really change on them. But the other thing is that we are all addicted, starting with granite and stainless steel and having it all. But just good old-fashioned values. You were brought up in Port Alberni, and yes, it was a white picket fence, but your parents didn't start out with a brand new fence.
Oh, no, it was all...
They moved along. So it's moving further east than you wanted to.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've got decent transit.
Yeah. And this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You were referring to this as it needs to be looked at from a regional...
Look at it holistic. Let's get transit out to Mission.
Yeah, right.
And then once it's the Mission, as that starts to move out, where's the next posting?
Yeah.
But we're better to make some holistic mistakes that treat the region rather than just looking for these high-profile little solutions here and there.
Yeah. I have a handful of young people as clients that have, because I like to help them out. And these people they don't max out their RSP contributions. They're barely making any TFSA contributions. So like these new programs have no material impact on and they're still struggling to get by.
Yeah. But it comes down to, you said earlier, do I know a region where it's working? Well, everybody's moved to the light. We all want to live where everybody else lives. Yeah. I was looking for a place in New York a number of years ago, and I was told find a location that is the least inconvenient to your lifestyle, which is where your dry cleaner is, where you like to go eat, where museums are, whatever we're looking for, rather than the most convenient. Because you're not going to find the most convenient. So what is not the least inconvenient? And I think, again, we just have to change our philosophy. Just get your name on title. I started this at 19, and I would tell all my friends, just own anything so one day you don't have to pay rent. That was my magic formula.
That's great advice.
But then homes were $33,000, and you got $300 a month rent for them.
Yeah. But you can still apply that advice today, Bob. Maybe you have to live out a little further out.
Buy it with a friend.
Yeah.
Own anything.
Yeah.
Just get your name on title, and then you've got a chip in the game, and you can move that along.
Bob, you were just saying that there should be 2 goals people have.
Yeah, well, my thing is just get your name on something so that you're in the game.
Yeah.
If you're going to stay and live with mom and dad for 10 years, rent it out until you can afford to live in it. Uh-huh. But you need a piece of property so that you can trade and slowly move up and maybe get back to the aspirational area where you wanted to be. But I've always felt that because we market condominiums, that once you get your name on title of a condominium, do anything you can to try and save up, or if that goes up in value, borrow some if rents have gone up, and buy something else a lot less than you wanted, but try and keep that one. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be your retirement. You're not hurting anybody, you're causing rental supply, and then start to move along to where you want to be, because owning one piece of property, you're always going to be selling it to move up or move sideways,
Right.
or as babies are born, everything
Yeah.
else. But once you get two, now you've got a piece of the rock. It's something that you keep long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's a
I
good
find
strategy.
people love to sell just to get a free appraisal. That everyone, we all want to say how much we got for it, rather than let's just keep it and put it away and wait long term.
Yeah.
This doesn't help first time buyers, my philosophy, because I'm causing people to hold it, but I am causing rental by telling clients
Yeah.
to
And
hold
you
on
need
to the property.
you need both.
We need both.
Yeah.
We need all of it.
Now, Bob, you started selling real estate when you were 19 years old. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're in your early 60s now?
I'm 66.
66.
Yeah.
Okay. So in kind of wrapping this up, if you were to look back at your early days, young boy coming out of East Vancouver, getting into this space, and you look at how the market, not necessarily how you approached it as a salesperson, as a marketer, because obviously you've been a huge success, so I'm sure you don't really need to change too much. But if you looked at the way in which any level of government had policies in place, was there anything that existed in the 1970s or 80s that we don't provide today to buyers that would be nice to bring back?
No, on new housing, I don't know. It's probably 1985, before Expo 86. They moved it to, if you bought a home priced under $87,500, I believe you could get a $10,000 grant. And new homes then were $75,000. And so I told everybody, every home's going up to $87,500 next week. They thought I was crazy, but it moved it along. But it got a lot more people into it. But the other thing with people like myself, we boast about, I don't have grade 12. I'm a fluke of nature, and ignorance was bliss. But I was born in 1956. Came into project marketing in the late 80s, early 90s, as housing was needed, urban living was accepted, and interest rates kept falling off. You can't recreate that.
Right.
So a lot of people sort of in my shoes try and tell you, what to do. But I think I tell everybody, young, just follow a passion, and the income will end up arriving there. The reason I came into real estate is I lived in a very complicated household where my mother left my father 17 times, half the time with furniture. But one of the last times, she phoned a broker. And I wish I could remember his name. He came out from Block Brothers, which was a famous brokerage firm then. And my mother made a chocolate cake and served coffee. And this guy sat there and he said, this is what the neighbors sold for. This is what happened here. This is what happened there. And I was a smart kid. And I thought, I can do this with no historical knowledge. I only need current data. And I get served coffee. And I just turned it into
That was the inspiration.
Making a living at kitchen tables. But anyone can find current data. Yeah. Historical data, to be a surgeon and to have an honorable career was going to take a lot of schooling. And that one thing, and we've always been massively data driven. I have 3 demographers and 3 economists and full-time staff. But we've always hidden that part and made it look like Bob was Rain Man and understood all this. But I have this whole team behind me. But it's hard to tell everybody, well, just go do that. But do it with passion. We did it with the art collection. I just decided to pick a passion, and some things work out.
Yeah. Wow. That's a neat story. Your son, Chris, is now helping you run the business.
He runs it.
He runs it.
He
Okay.
runs it,
Okay.
yeah.
What's kind of, you're 66, you just mentioned that. What's kind of the next stage of your life? What do you envision happening over the next decade for yourself? What are you aspiring to do?
Everybody needs a golf game. And so mine is art. I am chair of modern and contemporary acquisitions for the Art Institute of Chicago. I am the president of Tate London for America. So I have my art world that is mostly outside of Vancouver, but I've got that to do. But I still want to maintain the culture of the building. But I'll boast. I phoned Chris this morning and I said, I just got a note from Vancouver Magazine that I'm on the Power 50, but not just me. You and I are on there together. And I could feel his face go red on the other end. But he doesn't want profile. And I said, I think as a father, it's absolutely amazing to be able to then stand up together that transition is visible.
Yeah.
But I'll tie this together. Chris and I were outside of the Fairmont Hotel having coffee, and I was telling him a story about Jim Pattison. And he goes, shh, shh. I said, what? He said, shh, he's there. And I stood up. I said, Jimmy, I said, you don't know my son. I said, my son has taken over the business. And he said, I don't know two families where that's worked, but good for you. But I think the founders to a company are the biggest detriment to their growth, because I want yesterday back. I want the way it was.
Right.
It's gone. We all have an iPhone in our hand and things are completely changed. So we started to go through the transition of when I was 58.
Okay.
And I said, Chris, sit beside me, see if they like you. Because if the company doesn't like you, it's just nepotism.
Right.
But it worked. He's way smarter than I am and has a very egalitarian / Japanese approach to it that
Wow.
works. So I'm a proud guy, but a lucky guy. So this morning was actually a big game changer that he's going to have to be visible with me.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
we'll look forward to seeing that image on Vancouver Mag.
One day you'll get him in here. You asked if he wanted to come today, and he's
Yeah.
just, oh, no.
One other question I have for you is with respect to your activity here in Vancouver, you had an art gallery or a museum in Chinatown. I know Chinatown was, you had a building there. Can you maybe let the listeners know what happened there?
So we bought the oldest building in Vancouver's Chinatown in 2004. Crazy passion.
What's the name of the building?
Wing Sang.
Wing Sang.
And went through a 5-year heritage restoration, moved our offices in the front, and then built a museum for the art collection. In the 90s, a Black artist said to me, if you go in a museum and you don't see a Black figure in a painting on the wall, you think it doesn't belong. I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to change that. And I went, Kerry James Marshall was his name. And I went and bought a painting out of the estate of Paul Winfield, who was in Star Trek and Roots, etc. And it was from 1986, and it's called The Invisible Man. It's a Black figure with only the teeth and the eyes showing through. And I paid $54,000 for it. And I was highly criticized. A few dealers phoned and said, you don't know what you're doing. It's a $20,000 painting. And I said, I don't know. I think it's foundational to this guy's career. And I went on a tangent with collecting artists that deal with social justice. I have a saying that I use, maybe if I ever write a book, I'll use it, is it social jewelry or social justice? It's usually just social jewelry. But we wanted to be on the social justice side. So we have 3,000 works plus in the collection. The goal was that it would just be an extension of our living room, and we decided to open it to the public and do 3 shows a year. But the Chinese Canadian Museum approached us a couple of years ago and asked to buy the building. And I said, never, it's my legacy, it's my ego. And then we talked as a family. My kids don't want to run a museum when I die. And as Chris says, great, we leave the funeral and close your museum. Who's the asshole? Kids. So we started talking to them, and between the government and ourselves, we gave the building to the Chinese Canadian Museum.
Really?
And
wow.
So the legacy's there. We protected the oldest building.
Yeah.
It hurts, but I was a great, crazy custodian to restore it, but they're the right custodian.
Yeah.
So,
that's a nice story.
Yeah, I think it'll help stabilize Chinatown. I have this fantasy that grandma will come back because of the Chinese Canadian Museum, and then the grandchildren will start to respect it more. And let's see what that tomorrow's version of Chinatown is.
Yeah.
It's not the one I remember from the 60s and 70s, but there'll be a new version.
New version of it.
Walkable and livable.
Yeah. Well, Bob, this has been a great conversation today. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah. It's
Thank
all
you.
softballs. Easy. It's good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's
Thank you
been-
very much. Thank you.
Bob Rennie on Coastal Front today, talking about real estate development, a little bit of your history and how you got started, and government policy. Thank you for being on Coastal Front today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks.